Blake grunted to herself as the beowulf flew past her, claws slashing furiously at where she'd been just a few seconds before. One of the faster varieties of Grim in the forest, they still seemed to move so slowly in comparison to her feline grace. Then again, speed wasn't their main weapon, she considered herself as she flipped over another, her faithful weapon scoring a deep line across the back of its neck as she arced over it. Letting her ribbon-bound arm swing free, she propelled the second blade of Gamble Shroud in a violent arc, spinning it around her body and causing the blade to lodge deep into the bottom of the Beowulf's jaw. The beast fell with a sickening crunch, dislodging her blade as she swung it back to her hand. A brief twitch of her concealed ears showed that there was no enemy in the immediate vicinity. Taking a brief moment's rest to recover her bearings, her yellow eyes surveyed the scene about them. Grim corpses littered the floor of the forest like black leaves fallen from the trees. Weiss and RWBY were stood together at one side, the latter providing long-range support, while the Schnee Heiress provided a dead zone, incapacitating and dispatching any Grim that tried to approach them. She supposed the change in their tactics might have something to do with their exhaustion. RWBY's high-speed fighting style probably took a grievous toll on physical stamina. The girl was so used to ending fights quickly that she struggled against herds of weaker foes. Whether Weiss was defending their leader, or was herself running out of steam, or dust, was unknown. Blake's own partner, of course, seemed as filled with energy as ever, diving under the swinging arms of Beowulf to deliver a devastating blow to its chin. Blake rolled her eyes internally at the huge grin on her face. She was beginning to tire herself, and considering she was actively minimizing her movements to conserve energy, that was saying something. This whole training trip had proven to be a poor idea. "Boom! Got it!" A voice that sounded far too ecstatic called out, as the dust from another explosion whistled past her. There was another one with entirely too much energy, especially considering how heavy that hammer was. She didn't care what anyone said. Limitless energy had to be a facet of her semblance. Team Juniper had agreed wholeheartedly with RWBY's idea to get some live fire training in the Emerald Forest. It hadn't hurt that Beacon considered such training missions as permissible reasons to skip class, and could even consider them extra credit. Further reasoning had been sound. They had been training so much lately against each other, and other hunters in Good Witch's lessons, they were forgetting who the true enemy really was. Yang had been keen for any kind of adventure, and once Weiss had been won over, Blake had just tagged along to keep them out of trouble. As for the other team, Nora had been keen, naturally, and Ren had agreed to come to watch over her, whatever their relationship was or wasn't. Blake had known they would both come. Pyrrha had shown her usual protective attitude over the other two, and John had come along either because he wanted to be stronger, or just felt peer-pressured. Blake could never tell with the blonde. Speaking of the boy, he seemed to be doing okay. His style was much more immovable than her own, blocking and defending before lashing out at overextended limbs whenever he had the chance. Both of them relied almost entirely on counter-attacking, though she emphasised never being struck in the first place. To each their own, she guessed. Crunching of leaves behind her caused a sigh to escape her lips as she pirouetted on the spot, and weaved between the clawing arms of another Beowulf, this time keeping Gamble Shroud sheathed as she ploughed the blade into the beast's sternum. "Ready to go home yet?" Yang crowed over the violence, her back banging into Blake's as she assumed a back-to-back stance with the Faunus. Once more, Blake felt her eyes rolling. There was no need for a back-to-back stance fighting, and she wasn't mobile enough to cover the blonde. She'd literally just done it for style, as usual. "I certainly wouldn't mind a rest," the taller redhead opined from nearby. "I didn't expect this level of grim when we agreed to this." In the distance they could hear RWBY yell out an apology, which they collectively ignored. "A shower would be appreciated right now," Blake offered as she broke away from Yang and rejoined the fray. The sweat and blood was what was getting to her the most, the mingling scent disturbing her sensitive sense of smell. There were relatively few Grim left now, and despite their usually terrible luck, they hadn't managed to attract a Death Stalker with the noise or some such nonsense. Nor a squadron of White Fang or giant robots, or the usual ridiculous scenario she found herself dragged into. Why was it always crazy dangerous stuff, and not some crazy good-looking ninjas or something, she thought to herself with a sarcastic grin. "Blake, look out!" The sudden male scream caught her attention, her eyes instantly alighting on John, who was sprinting towards her. Trusting his reasoning despite his usual goofiness, she span herself to one side, hoping to avoid whatever Grim had managed to sneak up on her. A huge weight clipped her as she tried to dodge, slamming her to the ground even as a great weight landed on her legs, causing her to hiss in pain. The reflexive strike she delivered with the weapon bit down into the thick flesh, but with little reaction. Little wonder she hadn't heard or felt something sneaking up on her. The body that pinned her legs to the floor was an already dispatched Beowulf that had been knocked aside by someone. Grunting in irritation, she began squirming to free her legs from the smelly creature. "Blake, are you okay?" the blonde knight asked as he jogged to her side. She ignored his somewhat rhetorical question as she strained to free her legs. The body was heavier than she'd expected, and brute strength had never been her strongest point. "I'm fine. Help get this off me." "Yeah, sure." The boy seemed surprised at her instructions, but obligingly hurried to help, settling his hands under the creature's shoulders as he prepared to lift it enough that she could wriggle free. "This thing is heavier than it looks." Blake let her head fall back on the soft earth in silent frustration as she struggled with the corpse. Their studies aside, how light did he expect an 8-foot creature made of solid muscle and bone would actually be? "Damn it, this isn't budging. Hey Ren, could you give me a hand over here?" Blake let her head dip to one side as she laconically looked in the direction of the green-clad gunman her saviour had shouted out to her. The dark-haired boy seemed to let out a short sigh that perfectly reflected her own current mood as he stopped firing to look at them, right before his magenta irises widened in alarm. "John, behind you!" Blake flinched at the sudden noise and almost let out a yelp of alarm when John's boots slammed down next to her face as he took a more rigid stance. A solid ton of muscle and bone was on them the next moment, as a burly clawed arm slammed into the knight's shield, deflected off with a shower of sparks even as the force drove the boy back a step. Blake resumed her urgent struggling as Jean was forced back. The Beowulf had perhaps not noticed her yet, but it was only a matter of time before it did, or just stepped on her and killed her. "Blake!" the blonde shouted in alarm as he surged forwards to take a position above her prone body. If the situation hadn't been so dire, she would have felt more than a little foolish, having her head close enough to bite his ankles, while staring up his legs at his crotch. Instead, she struggled with her hips to try and get her legs out from under the dead Grim. A sharp pain shot up her left thigh at the effort, and for a moment she feared it had been punctured by one of the spikes the creatures had across their carapace. Another roar and a clash of metal above her drew attention back to the fight raging above her form. Jean once more staggered back from the blow before righting himself and planting his foot firmly down in front of her head. She knew it wouldn't last, though. The force of the blows was too strong for him to block without some of the momentum bleeding through. Normally he would seek to deflect the blow while moving back with the force. Staying completely stationary was doing nothing but damaging his arm and draining his aura. With his own body reeling back from each strike, he wouldn't be able to do anything with his sword. The blade would literally hit the Grim with all the force of a butter knife. A more heroic person might have shouted to him to save himself, to forget about her, that she would be fine. She'd read about those kinds of people all the time in her books, and dreamed about having that kind of bravery and fortitude. Until now, she had thought she might have. "I don't want to die, not stepped on like an ant by a monster that doesn't even have any good reason to kill me." "John, Blake, hang on!" And maybe she wouldn't have to die, neither of them would. Ren would certainly not have ignored them while they were trapped in such a precarious position, not when his best male friend and leader was in trouble, even if she wasn't as close with them as she was with her own teammates. She didn't think he would ignore her in trouble either. "Ugh!" the boy above her shouted as a sickening crack echoed from his forearm. Blake's yellow eyes widened in sudden fear as she saw his shield arm slump uselessly at his side. The sudden realization of what this meant shone in his eyes as much as her own, as the two of them met. His own blue eyes looked sad and defeated, as though it was just one more reason to be ashamed. She didn't need to see her own eyes to know they were wide in understanding terror. With the beast lunging in once more, there would be no way for him to defend himself or her from the attack. Instead, he would be forced to abandon his position above her and dodge the blow, leaving her to perish beneath the clawed feet of the maddened Grim. Their eyes stayed locked to each other as she tried to form the words she wanted. Instead, all she could do was mouth the words she wanted to shout out. "Move." His own blue eyes hardened, a sudden flash of anger or frustration even as he let out a short sigh. Blood splashed across her vision a second later as the two forms above her clashed. Through the red haze, she could see the dark bipedal Grim falling back away with a sword through its face. On the other side, a smaller, blurry figure also collapsed to the floor. "Jean?" she whispered, in the sudden silence as she struggled to look at the body lying beside her. His blonde locks had fallen across his face, so she couldn't see if he was awake, or even alive. "Jean!" she tried again, louder this time, as she reached out to touch him with one hand. The distance was too much, as her questing fingers fell short a few scant inches from his face. Frustrated, she strained herself to touch his skin. There had to be a pulse. Had to be. If only she could reach him and make sure. But the blood. There was so much blood, pooling beneath him even as her body screamed in pain from attempts to stretch it. Another blurry figure rushed to the downed boy's side, a male voice she recognised piercing her confusion. "John! Oh, God damn it!" Ren. That was good. He would fix this, right? The adrenaline rushing through her system seemed to be escaping her, along with what remained of her consciousness. Her fingers still reached out to touch that hidden face as she slipped away. "John." Maybe when she woke up, this nightmare wouldn't exist anymore.